I live in Dhaka, which is the. So I've been in Lahore for the last couple of days, and I cannot help but notice the similarities between these two cities, like the weather, the warm hospitality of people, and also the appreciation of food is very similar. Unfortunately, the similarities don't really end there. I mean, there are some bad things that we have in common as well. And these are the world's most polluted cities. So among the latest cities, Delhi is away. Then we have Lahore in number 5, and in number 26 we have Dhaka. And even though the ranks are very different, but especially during winter, the pollution levels are pretty similar. In fact, it's worse in Dhaka. And the sad thing is that it's probably not going to go away very soon. We all expect that our governments will do things to stop this, but in the history of this pollution curbing, the only developing country which could do it successfully was China. In 2013, they decided to curb their pollution level, and then they successfully, within a very short time, within 4 or 5 years, the average pollution level came down from 110 micrograms of particulate matter per meter cube to 54. However, that came through a national air quality action plan, and the budget for that was $270 billion over 4 years. I think our governments do not have that kind of fiscal capacity, and also our governments lack the regulatory capacity to enforce that kind of regulations. So what's left is basically, probably it's better for us if we take defensive measures or preventive health measures from our side, from individual level. And that is basically the motivation for this paper. So I'll go into this later, but first some things that we saw during our research. Number one is that people believe that air pollution is an outdoor issue. Once you are inside your home, there's no pollution. However, that's not really true. Pollution inside homes is almost around 80% compared to outside. The second is that even though air purifiers are very effective in enclosed spaces to reduce pollution, people do not really have a perception about air purifiers' effectiveness. They do not really know if it works or not. So these are the dual disbeliefs that we have been talking about in the paper. So before going into the main research design section, let's see the results. So the main results is that if you provide households with an air pollution monitor, they update their beliefs. They believe that their air in their homes is more polluted. However, they are not willing to pay more for an air purifier. The second result was that if you provide households with an air purifier and let them keep it for a while, they are less uncertain about its effectiveness, they update their beliefs. However, they do not really use the purifier for too long, not more than 30 minutes a day. And the third result is that if you provide households with a pollution monitor and also a purifier, then they start to increase their use of purifiers, and also they increase their valuation of purifiers. That is it. So that's the main results. And moving on. So what are we contributing to the literature? What are we contributing is basically we are trying to solve a puzzle. That is, if you look at some studies like this Ahmedabad study in Pakistan, which worked with face masks, or the influential study in China, they had seen that if you provide people with information on air pollution, demand for face masks or air purifier go up. However, there are other papers like the Bayes paper in Delhi, the Brainstorm paper in Delhi. They see that even if you provide people with air pollution information, they do not really value these preventive technologies like face mask or air purifiers more. So these are totally different results from some very influential papers. So why is this happening? So we try to answer this through this paper. Okay. Then moving on to the details of the paper. So the context and research design. So we did this study in Mirpur, which is a very densely populated area. Dhaka is very densely populated. It's even more so in Mirpur. So 3 housing societies. These are basically middle-income households with average monthly income of around $500, 60% Dhaka. And among these households, 34% has an air conditioner, which is quite expensive to buy and quite expensive to use as well. However, only 1% own an air purifier. This is in comparison to Delhi, where probably 5% of the households has air purifiers. So that's the area that we are studying. Yeah, and then as you can see, the air pollution is very, very high. In winter, it can go up to 225 micrograms of the ADE25 particles. That's 15 times the recommended level from WHO. So we had different phases in the research. So in the first phase, where we did kind of this baseline survey in November, so we worked with 1,008 households and randomized them to receive a monitor or not receive a monitor. It's 512, 512 as usual. And among people who received the monitor, we provided some of them with an attention incentive. What was that attention incentive? It was that we asked them that at least once a week, you will send us a text message which will tell us that how much is the pollution level in your household and what does it mean for the health of the household members. So this is the picture of the monitors that we use. And we also provided them with this chart where they can actually understand what the pollution level means from the health impact. Okay, then as I was saying that indoor air pollution can be very high compared to outdoor air pollution, and as you can see that it's around 80% most of the time during the day. So this is from data which we got from these air monitors. We have 3 outdoor air monitors placed in these 3 housing societies, and then the air monitors that we provided to households, that they were transmitting data back to us by a minute level, like every minute. Okay, then as I say, households believe that air home is much less polluted than outdoors. However, so this is a better figure. So the blue bar shows the outdoor air pollution level, and the actual indoor air pollution is a red bar. However, people's belief is the green bar, so they believe that it's much less than it actually is. So then, in phase 2, which is basically 2 months later, we again visited these households. We had some attrition of around 18% of the households dropped out, and we provided subset of them with air purifiers. And among these air purifiers, I think we provided 300 air purifiers, and 158 of those households had a bunch of 2. So now we have this sample where there were households which had air purifier and monitor, and there are also households which had only had monitors. Then, air purifier treatment. So, if in a controlled environment, a controlled environment means it's not in a laboratory. What we did is that in the survey farm we are working with, we took 3 rooms, placed 2 air purifiers in 2 rooms, and 1 room did not have any air purifier. And we closed the doors and windows and did an experiment for 6 times, each time 6 hours. And we saw that in that environment, air purifiers are very effective. Within 30 to 15 minutes, the pollution level goes down. However, as you can see, the moment we turn off the purifier, it starts to go up very quickly, which means that the ventilation is working. I mean, there's enough ventilation for pollution to sit inside the households. Also importantly, that we also provided compensation for electricity use, even though the amount of electricity it uses is very, very low. And for the purifiers, we also had smart plug data, which means that we knew when the purifiers were working and at what level they were using. So, these purifiers had, like a fan, 1, 2, 3 settings. They basically are supposed to use 10 watt electricity, while in a low setting, in a medium setting, 20, in a high setting, 40. And we can see that, that's what the producers say, and in reality, it's actually more or less true. It uses very little electricity. So electricity costs should not be a concern in these houses. However, demand for these purifiers is very, very low. So when we are providing these people with purifiers, we use that media mechanism, like how much you want to pay for these purifiers, 1,000 taka, 2,000 taka. And we saw that demand at the actual retail price of 16,500 taka, there's absolutely no demand. No one in our sample say that they are going to pay that much money. Moving on, then in the control groups, we have seen that people do not feel, people are basically very much unsure about this technology. They don't know if it works or not. Then the results. So the first result is what I was talking about at the very beginning, that households provided monitors update their beliefs about how much pollution there is inside. I mean, this table illustrates it better that if there is a monitor, the beliefs about severity of indoor air pollution goes up, beliefs about severity of ambient air pollution, like outdoor air pollution, that more or less stays the same. But beliefs about indoor air pollution related to outdoor air pollution, that's also updated. However, these people are not willing to pay more for this purifiers, right? I mean, so there's no significant impact. I mean, in a point estimate, actually, their willingness to pay goes down, which is Result 2 is households who are providing purifiers are less uncertain about its effectiveness. They now believe that, it's more effective. As you can see, both monitor and purifier has that effect. However, even though they're believing that purifier can actually reduce the pollution, we have the data from smart plants, right? And you can see that there have been some impact at the beginning, like in the first month. Then the impact basically goes away. It's washed away entirely by the third month. But when you provide a household with a pollution monitor and a purifier as well, that is when there is sustained increased use. So that plus a positive result for us. That if you let people know that what is the pollution level and let people have a preventive technology, then they will use it more. And they actually use it quite a bit much. However, they are not really willing to increase the valuation of the purifier. They do increase it, but that's significant, only at 90% of the interval. So it's very cheap. So again, going back to the results, as I say that households provided with both pollution purifiers increase purifier use. So how do we explain these results? Why are these results like this? So the intuition for the model is that we value our preventive technology based on the belief how severe the problem is and then how effective the solution is. So if we do not have, if we cannot update people's belief about the severity of the problem and also the effectiveness of the solution, people will not adapt the solution. That's what we are taking. And basically what we're saying is that there are multiple equilibrium. In a bad equilibrium, what happens is that no one knows about indoor air pollution and no one knows about air purifiers effectiveness, so no one uses it. So a mean household in the community will not adapt. However, in a good equilibrium, where everyone has correct beliefs and only use air purifiers, a mean household will basically adapt it because, they will see that there is knowledge. So what happens when you try to achieve the bad equilibrium? Perception of a purifier effectiveness is sufficiently low, so perception of correcting them will be helpful. And then if perception of health terms of indoor air pollution is sufficiently low, correcting perceptions about purifier effectiveness will not change the perception of purifiers. So I think a great example here is water filters. So what happens with water filters is that if the water is polluted, people know it immediately. The next day you have stomach ache. And then if you're using a water filter, the result is also immediate. You see that it goes away. So it's very easy for people to adapt water filters. However, for air filters or air purifiers, the impact is much longer term. So it's very difficult for people to understand and adapt this technology. So how do we reconcile the puzzle in the literature that we have seen in Pakistan? There's more demand for face masks. Also in India, there was more demand for face masks, but not for air purifiers. The result, we think that it's happening because people believe in face masks, that people believe if I wear a mask, then pollution will not enter my body system, and that's very easy to believe. That's quite intuitive compared to air purifiers. However, and that is why when in Delhi, Greystone, and also when it's tried to do it, demand for air purifiers did not go up, whatever it did. And so, but why does air purifiers work in China? Because we believe people in China are much more educated about the technology of air purifier, so they believe that the air purifiers may help them reduce indoor air pollution. So that's basically it. I've already talked about water filters. Now, as I have some more time, I'll just talk about another experiment that we did in January this year. which was that we tried to see if credit costing is an issue. So we offered households purifier where they can pay on 12 monthly installments that had no impact. Another thing is that we demonstrate purifiers and monitors to households. Like we went to households and showed them a purifier and monitor and showed them how turning on the purifier will reduce the pollution. However, that did not really have an impact on the willingness to pay, which probably tells us that clean air is an experience good. Like after people used it for 2-3 months, they thought, yeah, it's probably worth it to buy. So that's basically it. In conclusion, what we have to say is that probably policymakers should think about this problem in terms of holding information campaigns and also probably subsidizing air purifiers. And also very importantly is that purifiers are very expensive in Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Philippines. However, the technology is not that difficult to make. So if there are local companies who are making these purifiers, then the cost can go down by a lot. So we worked with SQ Pyramid and told them that can you give us a do-it-yourself version of these purifiers. So they told us that they can give it to us, and in that case the cost will be something around, and the retail cost will be something around 4,500 taka. So we are still working on that. I mean, if we have that, then probably that will be a valuable solution. So that's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this excellent presentation and touching very important topic of this pollution that is probably key issue or key challenge for a developing country like Canada. You mentioned that the Lahore is not an exception. We are not facing this issue, and probably this issue is very common in the rural areas and the developing part of the country because these are different as you mentioned. But the real question is how we can challenge their beliefs. So either this technology solve the problem to update their beliefs or just providing them a new instrument to change the behavior of the people. So the fundamental question that comes to our mind is how we create a desire among the people. Like I will explain in my own presentation that if I am not willing to change my own behavior, probably any additional support or intervention would have a very short-term impact. Like in case, if we take the example of this mask that was a well-known study, that there are common belief across the community, but that you need a different intervention, and there are self-belief that if I use this intervention, I maybe have a different implication. So then the intervention would be totally ineffective in terms of providing these instruments. If the beliefs are very common, then any support mechanism that work at the community level would have a long-term effect in terms of adaptation. And you see in your own research that the willingness to pay for these very small services, despite having some knowledge and the effectiveness of this instrument was very low or even negligible. Why? This is the key question that really help us in understanding how the public policy would work and how they can be implemented and how different kinds of intervention would lead to a different solution. And probably the equilibrium would emerge if there is a desire at the first level to understand the phenomena, to understand the problem. But if they didn't understand the problem, any kind of intervention would lead to the same result as you reported in your own paper. So my only thinking about this paper is that we have to redefine what kind of belief that people have. Is it individuals believe that they didn't discount the existing pollution when they compare it with the cost of health? If they actually know the cost of health, then probably they would adopt for that kind of technology without providing any state level support. But the real challenge and the real belief that undermines this entire intervention is their costing or the valuation of the AI. So the probably intervention would be in another way to motivate, or just like as in first presentation, there is a nudging from the job to the career. So that kind of nudging where you can actually realize them the importance of the health, then probably there would be a much higher willingness to pay for these kind of services, and ultimately that would lead to a better health. Thank you. Evaluation model. So initially we started with this evaluating this national poverty graduation program, but only economic part of this whole. Then we requested IDC to finance us some kind of qualitative part to actually look into the perception of the people after facing a flood 2022. Because that have massive implications for any kind of rural level intervention. As we know, the recent flood in KTK had a lot of implications for any kind of income related activity or livelihood means, especially for the poor. This, like, we started to realize this question, what happened with those who were provided some kind of support to develop their own productive assets. In this case, what we are evaluating is an asset transfer program where they provided some kind of livestock to ultra-poor people to develop their own livelihood needs, to develop an additional income mechanism. But the question for us that either any kind of climatic shock, that is now very common to us, and the flood frequency is much higher compared to the 3 or 4 decades. Although every year we are facing a very, like either it's a flash flood or any other kind of flood. So is that climate change would create a kind of vulnerability, or another economic argument where we can say that these provide a kind of buffer, support to fight against those shocks. So this was the underlying question to us. So how we can relate these things to these things. So for that, as I said, we evaluated the National Poverty Graduation Program that meant to create a livelihood opportunity where they provided assets to ultra-poor across a country, where they settled 23 districts from all 4 provinces. And as of now, they provided around more than like 4 lakh assets to these poor people. And they concluded this program, as we are evaluating the end line of this program as well, to see how the impact was over a period of time. But the key question for us, as I said, was because the intervention was implemented in 2020 and there was flood in 22. How these people cope with these massive flooding, and for that we use the South Punjab as a study area where the flood is very common, and further we have 3 districts, Jam, Leah and Bijiham. So we have 2 different kind of data set that we use for this evaluation. First, as I said, there is a pure quantitative part where we use the experimental approach, and we have around 2,000 control group as well as a treatment group, where we try to evaluate how the impact evolves over a period of time, and then we complement this analysis with a qualitative assessment, and we pick those households within from these quantitative samples where they reported that they faced some kind of a flood shock in 2022. So these are a household, those are chosen for this qualitative service, was a part of the original design, and we compare it, and though they are comparable with the rest of the survey or not. So, as I said, so we use a very basic identification strategy where we try to figure out how this RDD would work, and we have the learning variables and what we call the poverty scorecard, and the control group was above the cutoff and the treatment group was below the cutoff, and we use a range of 4 plus minus 22. Apart from that, we use various other parameters that we feel are important in terms of controlling addition factors, like the availability of public services is very important in terms of creating the impact of any intervention. For that, we use molar census to look into the availability of those services at the very level where we like stratify our sample. These are the simple basic validity tests where we try to see how the sample is representative in terms of applying this RDD, and the tests are validating our underlying assumption that the rectification strategy will hold. The question that, as I said, is important to us is look into the impact that we have on the overall sample. If you see, for example, the change in the poverty scorecard for the overall sample, and then you try to compare the flooded versus non-flooded household. So that kind of heterogeneity is really important for us, how the impact change. But we found in our analysis that though there was a significant impact when we estimate at the overall level, but when we do heterogeneity among the flooded versus non-flooded households, there are visible differences in terms of impact. Look at only the first indicator, that is a growth in overall poverty scorecard, and you can find there is like substantial decrease. Those it remains significant, but it is not as significant as it is for non-flooded households. This implies that though there are some impact in terms of creating a kind of livelihood, a kind of like some kind of support mechanism to the overall household, that is a well-proven concept, especially if you look at the example of other countries, drag and Indian example where the asset transfer is a very common intervention. But the result remains very weak when there is any kind of climatic shock. And this challenge the common concept, the common literature that the asset transfer would be a buffer during climate shock, and you use as a support mechanism, as a saving to either liquidate during crisis. But when we go into the other indicator that asset accumulation, we didn't find any impact among those households where there was a flood, and we find some impact on the household where there is no impact. This means that the heterogeneity is very strong in terms of creating a long-term impacts of these kind of interventions. Because this is the intervention where we are really looking for the uplift of the people. It's not about the handhold, it's the uplift of the people to come out of poverty, and they really want these programs meant to graduate these people. But if they suddenly fall back to the same equilibrium where they were after any shock, and these shocks now are very common in countries like Pakistan. Look at the recent flood shock in KP, and probably the rain in other parts of the country would have these implications that these interventions are not resilient in terms of creating a support mechanism against these shocks. So same like that in the others indicator. Then we go to understand why the impacts are not visible among the household. Those are actually faced 2022 flood. The common concept that is the tending cost of these livestock become like unaffordable to these households against the income that they were generating. So this again have a question for the intervention, that if the income is low compared to the tending cost and the fodder that they use to look after these people, then what would be the future of these interventions? Because the government is also looking for the scalability of these programs, especially they are looking for some kind of additional support from the FAD as well as the Islamic Development Bank to roll out this program in other 20 or 30 districts among the existing 25 districts. But if the the situation remains same, that there are a natural shock every year, then how we can sustain the impact and how we can elevate poverty? Because if you look at the recent number published by the World Bank, so they are like contradictory as compared to what the point is saying about the poverty number. But there is a natural trend in increase in the poverty. And that is a big question on these kind of social protection programs. Do they really sustainable program in terms of addressing the needs of the people? For usually one can say that this only meant for consumption, but the consumption impact are still not visible because the poverty is all about consumption and the poverty is on the increasing side. But what about the efficacy of these graduation programs that are meant to uplift ultra poor people? And the hard work, and we are still working and refining these, that how we can revamp this social protection intervention. One idea that we are pushing is to diversify these kind of interventions rather than only focusing on this livestock. That is a very fragile, especially in a country where this climatic change is a very common phenomenon. The sustainability and the return of this livestock is very minimal. And what we see in the last 4 years when the intervention law has been implemented in 2020, and now we are evaluating this program again in 2025. Even the third dose was we found in 23 as a short-term impact. They are disappearing in the medium term. We are not still talking about the long term where these impact maybe we don't find any impact, but they are disappearing in the next round of impact. So this again challenge the overall framework of this graduation program. So our key question was whether these kind of intervention create a vulnerability among the household during the crisis, or they can provide a buffer. So the finding from the quantitative as well as the qualitative message that they are very fragile. They create a more vulnerability, giving the cost of lending is now very high. And there is no alternative to reduce those costs, and especially when there is a flooding, it will be very difficult to manage these lifestyles. The only option that we have to make a transition from these standard approaches to a new approach, where I try to sell the idea of this village economic zone, where we can actually establish small zone just like a very large zone at the school level, where the school building is become vacant after 2 p.m. or the rural BHUs that become a very decent unit where we can establish these small zones, where we can provide these ultra poor an alternative source of business. That on the one hand give a support to these public communities, they increase their use, and on the other hand they give a kind of a support mechanism and business opportunity that will expand the value chain. The value chain is totally missing within that system, despite they claim that we give some training to be integrated within the value chain. But that kind of innovative method would really help to resolve those vulnerabilities within the issue of climate change. If there is no climate change, then probably livestock would be a first source of income to these ultra-poor people. But if this is not the case, and actually this is not the case, so we have to diversify these interventions. I presented these thoughts to the ministry because they are now pushing very hard towards the scalability of these standard intervention in other districts, despite knowing that the sustainability of these challenges. Thank you so much.
So thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. This is a very valuable paper and very interesting as well. So to be honest, I'm less of a trained economist and more of someone who has traveled around Bangladesh and talked with many different people in order to collect data. because I wanted data collection. So I'll try to analyze this from that perspective. So the Agricultural Practitioner Program is actually a very big program in Bangladesh as well, but in Bangladesh it's not government run. It's done by BRAC, which by now is the world's biggest NGO. And with BRAC, I mean, my personal experience is that this targeting the agricultural program is going to be one of the most, if not the most effective program. That's what the anecdotal experience tells me. So one thing that I had seen is that transfer assets are more diversified in Pakistan, like 60% households chose cows, while in Bangladesh it's 91% of the households. However, I mean, as we will see, that the results in Bangladesh is much less homogeneous. That people do better with this program. So why is this happening? One explanation could be that people of Bangladesh are very well suited to floods, so there's no problem, they can cope with floods. And the consequent conclusion might be that, yeah, you don't need to worry, people of Pakistan will also be well to floods. However, that will be very wrong. Why? Because with climate change, these floods will become more and more intense. Like in Bangladesh, what happened in 2024, there was this devastating flood in Kumilla and Feni, a region where there has not been any floods before. And so even though that flood was less intense than the flood that we get in the south or in the northeast, I mean, a lot of people died and a lot of assets were lost because people are not well adapted. And unfortunately, with climate change, this will go up and up. So the problem remains that how do we tackle this? So yeah, results from some relevant studies. I'll go to the Bangladesh study, which was done on BRAC's property evaluation program. So there's people are investing more time in livestock rearing, and people are devoting less time in agricultural labor or less time in wage services, which are good things. And there are higher earnings, high market expenditure, even higher savings. So that's great. So, but as I was explaining, that in Pakistan it's different. So people who are not impacted by floods, they have kind of similar results. The people who had impact from, who had suffered floods, with them the impact was literally different. So why did this happen? So I tried to see it from the point of view of the big push programs versus transitory relief programs. So I think everyone in this room knows about this S-shaped poverty curve, so I don't know if you can explain it. But to explain very briefly is that there is this trap zone where poorer people with more assets will eventually come back towards poverty. They will not be able to graduate. And the idea of these big push programs are that with enough assets, you push these people beyond that point E, where accumulating more assets will be more beneficial to them in the long run, rather than moving back towards the low productivity equilibrium that happens in poor people. So, what are these transitory relief programs? Basically, everything that we see, like open market sales, food reliefs, which are important for people to tackle shocks. However, it will not make them richer in the long run. For example, even with microfinance, what happens is that if you have a health shock or any other kind of shock, microfinance will help you to get past that shock. However, in the long run, with very high interest rates, you will probably come back to where you were. It will not help you to graduate out of poverty. And that is why some research indicates that microcredit works better with people who already have some kind of asset with them. In that case, probably they can go beyond that point of point which I mentioned earlier. So what I'm trying to say here is that when there is no flood, providing people with a cow or similar assets will probably help them to reach that green zone. However, when there are floods, what will happen is that the red zone will expand, and probably the expected value from your asset will go down. Because when there is flood, I mean, there is no market for cow milk, so what do you do with the milk? And probably when there is flood, you cannot really spend money to vaccinate your livestock. So in that case, the value of the asset goes down in the long run, and again, you fall into the poverty trap. So what can be the solutions to this? One thing could be to try to increase the value of the asset, like with the cow, if you can give them a loading cart, then probably it's easier for them to access the market. And also that if you can have a very good veterinary care network, that may help to increase the value of the asset. And also very importantly, you need to have very good flood shelters. So I'm not I don't really know about flood shelters in Pakistan. In Bangladesh, there is this huge network of flood shelters, and they are very useful. However, there are some downsides to it, like they're basically built for people, not for livestock. When people go there, they floods with livestock. There's also report of diseases spreading between this livestock. So there are issues like that, but these are probably few of the solutions that we can take. So that's basically it. Thank you.